Hello, and welcome to The Sleep Retreat. This podcast will help you relax, unwind, and if you want to, fall asleep. If you're already familiar with the show, feel free to skip ahead to 4 minutes and 30 seconds. If you're new to using a podcast to relax or fall asleep, here is why they work. By simply listening to something other than your own racing thoughts, your mind is offered a well-deserved hiatus. It's a break from all the endless, everyday thinking and processing. And it's all delivered in the form of a moderately captivating narrative, something interesting enough to hold your mind's attention, but also gentle and bland enough to lull you to sleep. Here at the Sleep Retreat, we offer a unique and creative listener experience delivered to you in 2 seamless stages. The first stage is something we call the tuck-in. During this approximately 10-minute segment, I'll be engaging your dreamy imagination and setting you down into an immersive, serene, comfortable space, a place far, far away, perfect for dozing off. And along the way, I'll guide you with simple things you can do to further relax and prepare for pending sleep. After this stage, when we are all tucked in and comfy in this make-believe lullaby land, it's time for the next stage, the drift-off. The drift-off is when we transition together into that sleepy state of slumber. First, we are guided by the somewhat interesting, yet also delightfully monotonous narration of this week's episode, often delivered in the style of an old AM radio or other lo-fi experience. After approximately 45 minutes, the narration concludes, transitioning seamlessly into a 30-minute or longer segment featuring nothing but the continued ambient sounds from our peaceful lullaby land. These soothing background noises range from the rumble of a thunderstorm and the distant calls of seagulls to the steady hum of a car engine, all designed for continued peaceful sleep. Now, it's good to know that it's common with sleep podcasts that it might take 2 or 3 listens before your brain fully sort of trains itself to relax to this show. Once you do, though, just as children love hearing the same bedtime story over and over again, upon return here, you'll find yourself quickly feeling more relaxed and peaceful and diving towards sleep. In this first series, we will feature readings from the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, this might sound like an unusual choice for a bedtime story, but believe me, it works. It's a blend of intrigue and at times wonderfully dull narrative, ideal for lulling you to sleep. I should say perhaps that the first few episodes might lean a little more towards the interesting side of the equation, but as the series progresses, they get increasingly monotonous and bland, perfect for sleeping. And you can always jump ahead in the series if you would like. Other stories are coming in the future, and there are several different sleeping environments you can choose from for each episode. Try them out until you find the perfect one for you, or maybe you mix it up from day to day, depending on your mood. If you have any questions or suggestions, send an email to info@porchlightpodcast.network. Now, let's get all settled in at the Sleep Retreat. Tonight, you'll be dozing off from the backseat of your parents' car, softly cradled by the gentle hum of the engine as it travels homeward late at night along a country highway. Imagine you are sitting in the back seat with your head nestled into a cozy pillow propped against the window. You are gazing out at the moonlit countryside, and on your face is a soft and secret smile. It's late Friday night, after playing in the pep band at your brother's basketball game far from home. Your kid sister has nodded off already. She's laying across the wide seat with her head resting softly in your lap. You are tired too after a long week of high school and homework, but you're also full of wonder, and that smile on your face is perfectly concealed in the shadows, only illuminated sporadically by the flickering flashes of light cast from the headlights of oncoming cars. You rest your forehead against the cool glass of the window. Every now and then, a distant farmhouse light appears, towering like a lighthouse in the dark, casting bright beams across the endless, waterless ocean of a prairie. Now, slowly we'll begin to relax. First, with eyes closed, just become aware of your breathing, feeling your chest gently rise and fall again. Next, we'll try taking a few deeper breaths, filling our lungs with air, holding it, and then gently exhaling and letting it all go. Ready? Inhale deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. And try thinking to yourself, as I sit here in the back seat, I can feel gravity's pull tugging me gently back towards Earth. With every exhale, I can feel the weight of the day slipping away. I can feel my feet, my ankles, calves, knees, and my legs, each part of me relaxing deeper and becoming heavier and more relaxed. Up in the front seat, your parents recap and relive the big game. They talk of jump shots and fouls, rebounds and timeouts. You close your eyes, but when you picture the crowded gymnasium, you remember something much sweeter than basketball. Your mind drifts back, but now the memory of the night is soothing and hypnotic, somehow quieter, as if it all played out in slow motion. Sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor, cheers blasting out from spirit sections choreographed by cheerleaders and mascots. The aroma of popcorn and hot dogs snaking its way from concessions all the way through the hot air, above the teams and players and referees, and then high into the packed stands where you and the band played and cheered and sang. You quietly reflect on how unexpected your first love appeared in your young life. It feels as if the universe brought it to you slowly, and yet, in the end, also unexpectedly in a flash. Now let's try taking a few more deep breaths. Ready? Breathe in deeply. Hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. Try continuing on your own, and while doing this, try thinking to yourself, as I sit here, my whole body feels heavy and relaxed. With every exhale, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth gently. I can feel my head, my shoulders, my neck becoming relaxed and at ease. And my legs are heavy and at peace with gravity's pull. Now my whole body, my legs and feet, my arms and hands, my torso, my head and neck and shoulders, my whole body is completely at peace, relaxed, and at ease. For weeks and weeks at band practice and at games, you had played right there next to each other, bumping elbows, close enough to catch quick flashes of fragrances, close enough for smiles, quick glances, silly and innocent flirtations without considering really when and where or if you might actually ever kiss. And then, unexpectedly, tonight, it just happened. while the whole gymnasium was on its feet, the whole world preoccupied with some monumental moment of a basketball game. It just happened right there in the minuscule universe between the two of you. When you think about it now, falling in love was a lot like those farmhouse lights out there in the darkness. Everything approached so slowly at first, off in the distance, hardly moving at all. And then, love gained momentum and approached you carefully and timidly, getting closer and closer, and before you knew it, before you both knew it, true love had rushed up on you in a heartbeat, irresistible and suddenly undeniable. You smile now, thinking how you had always imagined your first kiss would happen somewhere private and hidden, and yet, in the end, yours was out in the open and in front of hundreds of people who never even saw it. As your parents dial in the AM radio, you finally close your eyes and lean back. The original plan called for the president to spend only one day in the state, making whirlwind visits to Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. In September, the White House decided to permit further visits by the president and extended the trip to run from the afternoon of November 21st through the evening of Friday, November 22nd. When Governor Connolly called at the White House on October 4th to discuss the details of the visit, it was agreed that the planning of events in Texas would be left largely to the governor. At the White House, Kenneth O'Donnell, special assistant to the president, acted as coordinator for the trip. Everyone agreed that if there was sufficient time, a motorcade through downtown Dallas would be the best way for the people to see their president. When the trip was planned for only one day, Governor Connolly had opposed the motorcade because there was not enough time. The governor stated, however, that once we got San Antonio moved from Friday to Thursday afternoon, where that was his initial stop in Texas, then we had the time, and I withdrew my objections to a motorcade. According to O'Donnell, we had a motorcade wherever we went, particularly in large cities where the purpose was to let the president be seen by as many people as possible. In his experience, it would be automatic for the Secret Service to arrange a route which would, within the time allotted, bring the president through an area which exposes him to the greatest number of people. Advanced preparations for President Kennedy's visit to Dallas were primarily the responsibility of two Secret Service agents. Special Agent Winston G. Lawson, a member of the White House detail who acted as the advance agent, and Forrest V. Sorrells, special agent in charge of the Dallas office. Both agents were advised of the trip on November 4th. Lawson received a tentative schedule of the Texas trip on November 8th from Roy H. Kellerman, assistant special agent in charge of the White House detail, who was responsible for the entire Texas journey. As advance agent working closely with Sorrells, Lawson had responsibility for arranging the timetable for the president's visit to Dallas and coordinating local activities with the White House staff, the organizations directly concerned with the visit, and local law enforcement officials. Lawson's most important responsibilities were to take preventive action against anyone in Dallas considered a threat to the president, to select the luncheon site and motorcade route, and to plan security measures for the luncheon and the motorcade. Preventive intelligence activities, the protective research section, PRS of the Secret Service maintains records of people who have threatened the president or so conducted themselves as to be deemed a potential danger to him. On November 8, 1963, after undertaking the responsibility for advanced preparations for the visit to Dallas, Agent Lawson went to the PRS offices in Washington. A check of the geographic indexes there revealed no listing for any individual deemed to be a potential danger to the president in the territory of the Secret Service Regional Office, which includes Dallas and Fort Worth. To supplement the PRS files, the Secret Service depends largely on local police departments and local offices of other federal agencies, which advise it of potential threats immediately before the visit of the president to their community. Upon his arrival in Dallas on November 12th, Lawson conferred with the local police and the local office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation about potential dangers to the president. Although there was no mention in PRS files of the demonstration in Dallas against Ambassador Adlai Stevenson on October 24, 1963, Lawson inquired about the incident and obtained through the local police photographs of some of the persons involved. The FBI office in Dallas gave the local Secret Service representatives the name of a possibly dangerous individual in the Dallas area who was investigated. It also advised the Secret Service of the circulation on November 21st of a handbill sharply critical of President Kennedy discussed in Chapter 6 of this report. Shortly before, the Dallas police had reported to the Secret Service that the handbill had appeared on the streets of Dallas. Neither the Dallas police nor the FBI had yet learned the source of the handbill. No one else was identified to the Secret Service through local inquiry as potentially dangerous, nor did PRS develop any additional information between November 12th, when Lawson left Washington, and November 22nd. The adequacy of the intelligence system maintained by the Secret Service at the time of the assassination, including a detailed description of the available data on Lee Harvey Oswald and the reasons why his name had not been furnished to the Secret Service, is discussed in Chapter 8. Following the luncheon, the president would return to the airport by the most direct route. Accordingly, it was important to determine the luncheon site as quickly as possible so that security could be established at the site and the motorcade route selected. On November 4th, Gerald A. Bain, agent in charge of the White House detail, asked Sorrells to examine 3 potential sites for the luncheon. One building, Market Hall, was unavailable for November 22nd. The second, the Women's Building at the State Fairgrounds, was a 1-story building with few entrances and easy to make secure, but it lacked necessary food handling facilities and had certain unattractive features, including a low ceiling with exposed conduits and beams. The third possibility, the Trade Mart, a handsome new building with all the necessary facilities, presented security problems. It had numerous entrances, several tiers of balconies surrounding the central court where the luncheon would be held, and several catwalks crossing the court at each level. On November 4th, Sorrells told Bain he believed security difficulties at the Trade Mart could be overcome by special precautions. Lawson also evaluated the security hazards at the Trade Mart on November 13th. Kenneth O'Donnell made the final decision to hold the luncheon at the Trade Mart. Bain so notified Lawson on November 14th. Once the Trade Mart had been selected, Sorrells and Lawson worked out detailed arrangements for security at the building. In addition to the preventive measures already mentioned, they provided for controlling access to the building, closing off and policing areas around it, securing the roof, and ensuring the presence of numerous police officers inside and around the building. Ultimately, more than 200 law enforcement officers, mainly Dallas police, but including 8 Secret Service agents, were deployed in and around the Trade Mart. the motorcade route. On November 8th, when Lawson was briefed on the itinerary for the trip to Dallas, he was told that 45 minutes had been allotted for a motorcade procession from Love Field to the luncheon site. Lawson was not specifically instructed to select the parade route, but he understood that this was one of his functions. Even before the Trade Mart had been definitely selected, Lawson and Sorrells began to consider the best motorcade route from Love Field to the Trade Mart. On November 14th, Lawson and Sorrells attended a meeting at Love Field, and on their return to Dallas, drove over the route which Sorrells believed best suited for the proposed motorcade. This route, eventually selected for the motorcade from the airport to the Trade Mart, measured 10 miles and could be driven easily within the allotted 45 minutes. From Love Field, the route passed through a portion of suburban Dallas, through the downtown area along Main Street, and then to the Trade Mart via Stemmons Freeway. For the president's return to Love Field following the luncheon, the agent selected the most direct route, which was approximately 4 miles. After the selection of the Trade Mart as the luncheon site, Lawson and Sorrells met with Dallas Chief of Police Jesse E. Curry and several other command officers to discuss details of the motorcade and possible routes. The route was further reviewed by Lawson and Sorrells with Assistant Chief Batchelor and members of the local host committee on November 15th. The police officials agreed that the route recommended by Sorrells was the proper one and did not express a belief that any other route might be better. On November 18th, Sorrells and Lawson drove over the selected route with Batchelor and other police officers, verifying that it could be traversed within 45 minutes. Representatives of the local host committee and the White House staff were advised by the Secret Service of the actual route on the afternoon of November 18th. The route impressed the agents as a natural and desirable one. Sorrells, who had participated in presidential protection assignments in Dallas since a visit by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1936, has testified that the traditional parade route in Dallas was along Main Street, since the tall buildings along the street gave more people an opportunity to participate. The route chosen from the airport to Main Street was the normal one, except where Harwood Street was selected as the means of access to Main Street in preference to a short stretch of the Central Expressway, which presented a minor safety hazard and could not accommodate spectators as conveniently as Harwood Street. According to Lawson, the chosen route seemed to be the best. It afforded us wide streets most of the way because of the buses that were in the motorcade. It afforded us a chance to have alternative routes if something happened on the motorcade route. It was the type of suburban area, a good part of the way, where the crowds would be able to be controlled for a great distance. And we figured that the largest crowds would be downtown, which they were, and that the wide streets that we would use downtown would be of sufficient width to keep the public out of our way. Elm Street, parallel to Main Street and 1 block north, was not used for the main portion of the downtown part of the motorcade because Main Street offered better vantage points for spectators. To reach the Trade Mart from Main Street, the agents decided to use the Stemmons Freeway, the most direct route. The only practical way for westbound traffic on Main Street to reach the northbound lanes of the Stemmons Freeway is via Elm Street, which route number 77 traffic is instructed to follow in this part of the city. Elm Street was to be reached from Main by turning right at Houston, going 1 block north and then turning left onto Elm. On this last portion of the journey, only 5 minutes from the Trade Mart, the President's motorcade would pass the Texas School Book Depository building on the northwest corner of Houston and Elm Streets. The building overlooks Dealey Plaza. The Elm Street approach to the Stemmons Freeway is necessary in order to avoid the traffic hazards which would otherwise exist if right turns were permitted from both Main and Elm into the freeway. To create this traffic pattern, a concrete barrier between Main and Elm Streets presents an obstacle to a right turn from Main across Elm to the access road to Stemmons Freeway and the Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike. This concrete barrier extends far enough beyond the access road to make it impracticable for vehicles to turn right from Main directly to the access road. A sign located on this barrier instructs Main Street traffic not to make any turns. In conformity with these arrangements, traffic proceeding west on Main is directed to turn right at Houston in order to reach the Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike, which has the same access road from Elm Street as does the Stemmons Freeway. The planning for the motorcade also included advanced preparations for security arrangements along the route. Sorrells and Lawson reviewed the route in cooperation with Assistant Chief Batchelor and other Dallas police officials who took notes on the requirements for controlling the crowds and traffic, watching the overpasses, and providing motorcycle escort. To control traffic, arrangements were made for the deployment of foot patrolmen and motorcycle police at various positions along the route. Police were assigned to each overpass on the route and instructed to keep them clear of unauthorized persons. No arrangements were made for police or building custodians to inspect buildings along the motorcade route since the Secret Service did not normally request or make such a check. Under standard procedures, the responsibility for watching the windows of buildings was shared by local police stationed along the route and Secret Service agents riding in the motorcade. As the date for the president's visit approached, the two Dallas newspapers carried several reports of his motorcade route. The selection of the Trade Mart as the possible site for the luncheon first appeared in the Dallas Times-Herald on November 15, 1963. The following day, the newspaper reported that the presidential party apparently will loop through the downtown area, probably on Main Street, en route from Dallas Love Field, on its way to the Trade Mart. On November 19th, the Times-Herald afternoon paper detailed the precise route. From the airport, the president's party will proceed to Mockingbird Lane to Lemon and then to Turtle Creek, turning south to Cedar Springs. The motorcade will then pass through downtown on Harwood and then west on Main, turning back to Elm at Houston and then out Stemmons Freeway to the Trade Mart. Also on November 19th, the Morning News reported that the president's motorcade would travel from Love Field along specified streets, then Harwood to Main, Main to Houston, Houston to Elm, Elm under the triple underpass to Stemmons Freeway, and on to the Trade Mart. On November 20th, a front-page story reported that the streets on which the presidential motorcade would travel included Main and Stemmons Freeway. On the morning of the president's arrival, the Morning News noted that the motorcade would travel through downtown Dallas onto the Stemmons Freeway, and reported that the motorcade will move slowly so that crowds can get a good view of President Kennedy and his wife. The president's intention to pay a visit to Texas in the fall of 1963 aroused interest throughout the state. The two Dallas newspapers provided their readers with a steady stream of information and speculation about the trip, beginning on September 13th, when the Times-Herald announced in a front-page article that President Kennedy was planning a brief L-Day tour of 4 Texas cities: Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. Both Dallas papers cited White House sources on September 26th as confirming the president's intention to visit Texas on November 21st, with Dallas scheduled as one of the stops. Articles, editorials, and letters to the editor in the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Times-Herald after September 13th reflected the feeling in the community toward the forthcoming presidential visit. Although there were critical editorials and letters to the editors, the news stories reflected the desire of Dallas officials to welcome the president with dignity and courtesy. An editorial in the Times-Herald of September 17th called on the people of Dallas to be congenial hosts, even though Dallas didn't vote for Mr. Kennedy in 1960, may not endorse him in 64. On October 3rd, the Dallas Morning News quoted U.S. Representative Joe Poole's hope that President Kennedy would receive a good welcome. Increased concern about the president's visit was aroused by the incident involving the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai E. Stevenson. On the evening of October 24, 1963, after addressing a meeting in Dallas, Stevenson was jeered, jostled, and spat upon by hostile demonstrators outside the Dallas Memorial Auditorium Theater. Mayor Earl Cable called on the city to redeem itself during President Kennedy's visit. He asserted that Dallas had shed its reputation of the 20s as the Southwest hate capital of Dixie. On October 26th, the press reported Chief of Police Curry's plans to call in 100 extra off-duty officers to help protect President Kennedy. Any thought that the president might cancel his visit to Dallas was ended when Governor Connolly confirmed on November 8th that the president would come to Texas on November 21st, 22, and that he would visit San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, Dallas, and Austin. During November, the Dallas papers reported frequently on the plans for protecting the president, stressing the thoroughness of the preparations. They conveyed the pleas of Dallas leaders that citizens not demonstrate or create disturbances during the president's visit. On November 18th, the Dallas City Council adopted a new city ordinance prohibiting interference with attendance at lawful assemblies. 2 days before the president's arrival, Chief Curry warned that the Dallas police would not permit improper conduct during the president's visit. Meanwhile, on November 17th, the president of the Dallas Chamber of Commerce referred to the city's reputation for being the friendliest town in America and asserted that citizens would greet the President of the United States with the warmth and pride that keep the Dallas spirit famous the world over. 2 days later, a local Republican leader called for a civilized, nonpartisan welcome for President Kennedy, stating that, in many respects, Dallas County has isolated itself from the mainstream of life in the world in this decade. Another reaction to the impending visit, hostile to the president, came to a head shortly before his arrival. On November 21st, there appeared on the streets of Dallas the anonymous handbill mentioned above. It was fashioned after the wanted circulars issued by law enforcement agencies. Beneath 2 photographs of President Kennedy, one full face and one profile, appeared the caption, "Wanted for treason," followed by a scurrilous bill of particulars that constituted a vilification of the president. And on the morning of the president's arrival, there appeared in the morning news a full, black-bordered advertisement headed, "Welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas," sponsored by the American Fact-Finding Committee, which the sponsor later testified was an ad hoc committee formed strictly for the purpose of having a name to put in the paper. The welcome consisted of a series of statements and questions critical of the president and his administration. The trip to Texas began with the departure of President and Mrs. Kennedy from the White House by helicopter at 10:45 a.m. on November 21st, 1963, for Andrews AFB. They took off in the presidential plane, Air Force One, at 11 a.m., arriving at San Antonio at 1:30 p.m. They were greeted by Vice President Johnson and Governor Connolly, who joined the presidential party in a motorcade through San Antonio. During the afternoon, President Kennedy dedicated the U.S. Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine at Brooks AFB. Late in the afternoon, he flew to Houston, where he rode through the city in a motorcade, spoke at the Rice University Stadium, and attended a dinner in honor of U.S. Representative Albert Thomas. At Rice Stadium, a very large, enthusiastic crowd greeted the president. In Houston, as elsewhere during the trip, the crowds showed much interest in Mrs. Kennedy. David F. Powers of the president's staff later stated that when the president asked for his assessment of the day's activities, Powers replied that the crowd was about the same as the one which came to see him before, but there were 100,000 extra people on hand who came to see Mrs. Kennedy. Late in the evening, the presidential party flew to Fort Worth, where they spent the night at the Texas Hotel. On the morning of November 22nd, President Kennedy attended a breakfast at the hotel and afterward addressed a crowd at an open parking lot. The president liked outdoor appearances because more people could see and hear him. Before leaving the hotel, the president, Mrs. Kennedy, and Kenneth O'Donnell talked about the risks inherent in presidential public appearances. According to O'Donnell, the president commented that if anybody really wanted to shoot the President of the United States, it was not a very difficult job. All one had to do was get to a high building someday with a telescopic rifle, and there was nothing anybody could do to defend against such an attempt. In Dallas, the rain had stopped, and by mid-morning, a gloomy, overcast sky had given way to the bright sunshine that greeted the presidential party when Air Force One touched down at Love Field at 11:40 a.m. Governor and Mrs. Connolly and Senator Ralph W. Yarborough had come with the president from Fort Worth. Vice President Johnson's airplane, Air Force Two, had arrived at Love Field at approximately 11:35 a.m., and the Vice President and Mrs. Johnson were in the receiving line to greet President and Mrs. Kennedy. After a welcome from the Dallas Reception Committee, President and Mrs. Kennedy walked along a chain-link fence at the reception area, greeting a large crowd of spectators that had gathered behind it. Secret Service agents formed a cordon to keep the press and photographers from impeding their passage and scanned the crowd for threatening movements. Dallas police stood at intervals along the fence, and Dallas plainclothesmen mixed in the crowd. Vice President and Mrs. Johnson followed along the fence, guarded by 4 members of the vice presidential detail. Approximately 10 minutes after the arrival at Love Field, the President and Mrs. Kennedy went to the presidential automobile to begin the motorcade. Secret Service arrangements for presidential trips, which were followed in the Dallas motorcade, are designed to provide protection while permitting large numbers of people to see the president. Every effort is made to prevent unscheduled stops, although the president may, and in Dallas did, order stops in order to greet the public. When the motorcade slows or stops, agents take positions between the president and the crowd. The order of vehicles in the Dallas motorcade was as follows. Dallas police motorcycles preceded the pilot car. Manned by officers of the Dallas Police Department, this automobile preceded the main party by approximately quarter of a mile. Next came 4 to 6 motorcycle policemen whose main purpose was to keep the crowd back. Their main function was to spot trouble in advance and to direct any necessary steps to meet the trouble. The presidential limousine. The president's automobile was specially designed 1961 Lincoln convertible with 2 collapsible jump seats between the front and rear seats. It was outfitted with a clear plastic bubble top which was neither bulletproof nor bullet resistant. Because the skies had cleared in Dallas, Lawson directed that the top not be used for the day's activities. He acted on instructions he had received earlier from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Roy H. Kellerman, who was in Fort Worth with the president. Kellerman had discussed the matter with O'Donnell, whose instructions were, if the weather is clear and it is not raining, have that bubble top off. Elevated approximately 15 inches above the back of the front seat was a metallic frame with 4 handholds that riders in the car could grip while standing in the rear seat during parades. At the rear on each side of the automobile were small running boards, each designed to hold a Secret Service agent. with a metallic handle for the rider to grasp. The president had frequently stated that he did not want agents to ride on these steps during a motorcade except when necessary. He had repeated this wish only a few days before during his visit to Tampa. President Kennedy rode on the right-hand side of the rear seat with Mrs. Kennedy on his left. Governor Connolly occupied the right jump seat, Mrs. Connolly the left. Driving the presidential limousine was Special Agent William R. Greer of the Secret Service. On his right sat Kellerman. Kellerman's responsibilities included maintaining radio communications with the lead and follow-up cars, scanning the route, and getting out and standing near the president when the car stopped. 4 motorcycles, 2 on each side, flanked the rear of the presidential car. They provided some cover for the president, but their main purpose was to keep back the crowd. Presidential follow-up car. This vehicle, a 1955 Cadillac 8-passenger convertible, especially outfitted for the Secret Service, followed closely behind the president's automobile. It carried 8 Secret Service agents, 2 in the front seat, 2 in the rear, and 2 on each of the right and left running boards. Each agent carried a .38 caliber pistol, and a shotgun and automatic rifle were also available. Presidential assistants David F. Powers and Kenneth O'Donnell sat in the right and left jump seats respectively. The agents in this car had instructions to watch, scanning not only the crowds but the windows and roofs of buildings, overpasses, and crossings. They were instructed to watch particularly for thrown objects, sudden actions in the crowd, and any movements toward the presidential car. The agents on the front of the running boards had directions to move immediately to positions just to the rear of the president and Mrs. Kennedy when the president's car slowed to a walking pace or stopped, or when the press of the crowd made it impossible for the escort motorcycles to stay in position on the car's rear flanks. The 2 agents on the rear of the running boards were to advance toward the front of the president's car whenever it stopped or slowed down sufficiently for them to do so. Vice Presidential Car. The Vice Presidential automobile, a 4-door Lincoln convertible obtained locally for use in the motorcade, proceeded approximately 2 to 3 car lengths behind the president's follow-up car. This distance was maintained so that spectators would normally turn their gaze from the president's automobile by the time the vice president came into view. Vice President Johnson sat on the right-hand side of the rear seat, Mrs. Johnson in the center, and Senator Yarborough on the left. Rufus W. Youngblood, special agent in charge of the vice president's detail, occupied the right-hand side of the front seat, and Herschel Jacks of the Texas State Highway Patrol was the driver. Vice Presidential follow-up car. Driven by an officer of the Dallas Police Department, this vehicle was occupied by 3 Secret Service agents and Clifton C. Garter, assistant to the Vice President. These agents performed for the Vice President the same functions that the agents in the presidential follow-up car performed for the President. Remainder of motorcade. The remainder of the motorcade consisted of 5 cars for other dignitaries, including the mayor of Dallas and Texas congressmen, telephone and Western Union vehicles, a White House communications car, 3 cars for press photographers, an official party bus for White House staff members and others, and 2 press buses. Admiral George G. Berkeley, physician to the president, was in a car following those containing the local and national representatives. A base station at a fixed location in Dallas operated a radio network which linked together the lead car, presidential follow-up car, White House communications car, Trade Mart, Love Field, and the presidential and vice presidential airplanes. The vice presidential car and vice presidential follow-up car used portable sets with a separate frequency for their own car-to-car communication. The motorcade left Love Field shortly after 11:50 a.m. and drove at speeds up to 25 to 30 miles an hour through thinly populated areas on the outskirts of Dallas. At the president's direction, his automobile stopped twice, the first time to permit him to respond to a sign asking him to shake hands. During this brief stop, agents in the front positions on the running boards of the presidential follow-up car came forward and stood beside the president's car, looking out toward the crowd, and Special Agent Kellerman assumed his position next to the car. On the other occasion, the president halted the motorcade to speak to a Catholic nun and a group of small children. In the downtown area, large crowds of spectators gave the president a tremendous reception. The crowds were so dense that Special Agent Clinton J. Hill had to leave the left front running board of the president's follow-up car 4 times to ride on the rear of the president's limousine. Several times, Special Agent John D. Reddy came forward from the right front running board of the presidential follow-up car to the right side of the president's car. Special Agent Glenn A. Bennett once left his place inside the follow-up car to help keep the crowd away from the president's car. When a teenage boy ran toward the rear of the president's car, Reddy left the running board to chase the boy back into the crowd. According to plan, the president's motorcade proceeded west through downtown Dallas on Main Street to the intersection of Houston Street, which marks the beginning of Dealey Plaza. From Main Street, the motorcade turned right and went north on Houston Street, passing tall buildings on the right, and headed toward the Texas School Book Depository building. The spectators were still thickly congregated in front of the buildings which lined the east side of Houston Street, but the crowd thinned abruptly along Elm Street, which curves in a southwesterly direction as it proceeds toward the Triple Underpass and the Stemmons Freeway. As the motorcade approached the intersection of Houston and Elm Streets, there was general gratification in the presidential party about the enthusiastic reception. Evaluating the political overtones, Kenneth O'Donnell was especially pleased because it convinced him that the average Dallas resident was like other American citizens in respecting and admiring the president. Mrs. Connolly, elated by the reception, turned to President Kennedy and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." The president replied, "That is very obvious."